Now, today we have three speakers. All three are members of the Piedmont chapter of the North American Rock Garden Society. Last fall, these three people, as well as other members of our chapter, went to Greece to see the autumn flowers. It was a trip that was sponsored by the North American Rock Garden Society, North American Rock Garden Society. So I will introduce the speakers in the order in which they will speak to us. The first one is David White. David is a mechanical engineer by training and vocation. He got interested in gardening as a weekend hobby 35 years ago and became more intensely interested in plants when he joined the Piedmont chapter of NARGS 20 years ago. Since then, he has been the chapter chair of our chapter. He's also now the current treasurer of our chapter. And at the national level, David has served on the board of directors. He's also been the head of the Norman Sanger Endowment Fund, of which our chapter and the Ralston Arboretum and Plant Delights Nursery has benefited from. And he's also currently the chair of the NARGS Tours and Adventures Committee, which is the group that sponsored the trip to Greece that you'll hear about in a moment. So David is our first speaker. Our second speaker will be Nancy Doubrava, who formerly worked at the J.C. Ralston Arboretum for 18 years as a communications specialist before retiring 2 years ago. Nancy grew up in South Florida, where she got a BS degree from the University of Florida before moving to North Carolina to obtain a master's degree in horticultural science with J.C. Ralston. She retired, as I said, 2 years ago, and now her favorite parts of retirement are trips to natural areas, volunteering at the Ralston Arboretum, and getting to know more about her friends. Our last speaker today is Cyndy Cromwell, who relocated from Connecticut in 2011 to the more gentler climate of the Triangle area in North Carolina. She is an active volunteer in several organizations, including the Ralston Arboretum and also Juniper Level Botanic Garden out at Plant Delights Nursery. And of course, our own chapter, she's a volunteer as well. She is currently a member of the NARGS National Board, and she is serving as the chair of the Southeast Regional Traveling Speakers Program, which has been curtailed currently because of the coronavirus. Cyndy has traveled on NARGS trips to the Bighorn Mountains in Wyoming with some of our other members, and also to Yunnan, China, and most recently to Greece. So let's all give a virtual welcome to these three speakers. David?
Thanks, Bobby.
Unmute, David.
All right, I think I'm unmuted. Do I need the screen share, Chris?
You are unmuted. You do need to click on the green screen, share screen button.
Okay. I think it's working on it, I hope. Several steps here. All right, can you see?
There you go.
So at this point I think I'm ready. Bobby said this was a tour to Greece focused on the bulbs that come up in the fall. Greece is a Mediterranean climate, being in the Mediterranean, and has a very dry summer, and when the fall rains come, a lot of bulbs come into to growth. It was held in November of last year. Out of the 21 people who went on the tour, 9 of those 21 were from the Piedmont chapter. If you can recognize faces off this photograph, from left to right, there was Gloria and Jim Janke, my wife Carolyn, who's in the sunglasses, Elsa Liner, myself in the back, Cyndy Cromwell, Richard Lane, Nancy Doubrava, and Amelia Lane. Person kneeling in front is Lefteris Dariotis, who is our guide. Lefteris is an exceptional botanist, as well as did a great job of organizing the tour, and just a fabulous personality as well. What I'm going to do is do a general travel guide of where we went, and we'll leave it to Cyndy and to Nancy to focus more on some of the plants we saw. I will be talking about some of the plants that they are not going to be talking about, largely some of the non-bulb plants that we saw. Okay, how do I advance here? Thought I could just scroll, Chris, with my arrows. What do I need to do?
You should be able to do that, but I wonder if you're in some kind of other thing. Just go back to PowerPoint and click on the image or something.
Let's see.
There you go.
There's a different place to click. We started out in Athens, and I don't know if there's a way to, I guess there's not a pointer here or is there a pointer? I think I'll not be adventurous. Anyway, we started out in Athens. On the first day, went up to the northern part of Greece, up around Meteora, spent 3 nights there, came back to Greece for 3 nights, and then went down to the southern tip of the Peloponnes, down at Gythio and Areopoli for the last 3 nights, and then came back to Athens. And then from Athens, the botanical tour itself ended at that point, but we had another 4 days for people who wanted to stay in Greece and focus more on the archaeology and history of Greece. And out of the 21 people, I think it was 19 out of the 21 stayed over for the additional days. First day was arriving in Athens. We had a hotel that was right downtown. This photo was taken very close to the hotel. You could actually walk out onto the street and look up the street and see the Acropolis from where we were. I went up a little further to get a little bit closer to the Acropolis. But I guess on this first night, to the left of the photo, you can see the Temple of Athena, and to the right is the Parthenon. One of the things we did throughout the trip was Lefteri did a great job of organizing meals. The Greeks tend to have 1 large meal a day, and it's generally at lunchtime. It's kind of a late lunch by American standards, but he organized some fabulous meals every day. This first day, because we arrived that day, the meal was in the evening. The second day, we traveled up through central Greece. And if you've been to Greece before, you've probably been to Athens. You may have been on a cruise that went to the islands. I don't know how many Americans get to the northern part of Greece as part of a tour, but I have to admit I was surprised to see fir trees, pines, deciduous hardwoods. Again, this was November, so it was their fall and the leaves were changing. These limestone cliffs, it looked very much like the Rocky Mountains. It was not an environment that I was expecting, having been to more of the Greek Isles and Athens previously. This is the Parnassus Mountains that we're looking at. The height, the mountains there get up to about 8,000 feet. And I know some folks are familiar with the grass of Parnassus, which I think is named for this area. It was hard to capture in a photo the cyclamen that just carpeted the forest floor in several places we stopped at. It's an oak forest, and there were places that were, as far as you could see into the woods, just covered with Cyclamen heterofolium. At the end of the second day, we arrived in Kalambaka, which is a town close to Meteora. some of you may have heard of, some of you may have visited the monasteries at Meteora. It's a UNESCO World Heritage Site. There's a total of, I believe it's 24 monasteries that were built up on these sandstone pillars, starting back about the 11th century. The monasteries were put there by monks in the Greek Orthodox Church. You know, it was a good place for solitude because they were hard to get to. There's still about 6 out of those 24 that are still inhabited. In some cases, the number of monks or nuns is very small. And I think there's 1 or 2 of the monasteries that only have a single inhabitant at this point, but quite impressive just from a visual image standpoint. The 4th day, we went up to the area of Kozani, which is further to the north from Kalambaka and the Meteora area. Nancy's going to be talking about what we saw there, but it all focused around saffron crocus. On day 5, we were traveling back to Athens. We stopped several places. This is a photo of a collection of 3 photos of Cyclamen heterofolium, just showing the diversity of foliage and leaf shape in a very small area. I included this picture of Sternbergia lutea in the picture. It was the only cluster of Sternbergia I could find where we stopped at, and basically because people were pilfering. It was obvious that people had come out with a shovel and had harvested bulbs out of the woodland area there. You know, you always hear the story about be careful where you get your bulbs from because there's an active trade. It was kind of sad. I'm guessing this was a cluster that bloomed a little bit later than the others, such that it was overlooked by the folks collecting bulbs. Day 6, we were back in Athens and went to Lefteris's gardens, and I say plural there because he actually has 2 gardens. I think Cyndy in the summer issue of the Trillium had written a piece on what he refers to the goat garden, which is a dry garden that gets no supplemental watering. And then this picture is taken in, I believe this picture is from his parents' backyard, where he has another garden that is irrigated and kept watered. He also has an amazing collection of, in addition to being a botanist and having the gardens he takes care of, he also collects and sells seed. And he had a seed collection area, which I thought I'd taken a photo of, but he's kind of the Tony Avent of seed. He has this room that's just full of bags, very neatly organized, but it's just amazing how many seed and what a process he has for collecting and selling and distributing seed. We also went to the Voorhees Museum, which is a private museum, privately owned museum, but open to the public of ancient as well as modern Greek art. And when searching for colchicums, if you remember this time last year, there were a number of fires in Greece because it had been so dry. And that afternoon, we were largely unsuccessful at finding colchicums just because it was such difficult conditions last year. We actually were concerned at one point, probably this time last year, about whether they were going to get enough rain to put out the fires as well as enough rain to encourage the bulbs to go into flowering. Day 7, we stayed in the Athens area and went botanizing along the southeast coast of Attica. Attica is the state or province in which Athens resides. We saw Crocus cartwrightianus, which is generally viewed as the precursor to saffron crocus. Saffron is not a crocus that's found in the wild anywhere. It may have been found in the wild at some point, but now it's purely a commercial product, but it's descended from cartwrightianus. Sternbergia lutea, I know I grow it in my yard. I think some of you perhaps have Sternbergia lutea. sometimes called the yellow fall crocus, Narcissus serratinus. This is a very small narcissus that's fall blooming, and I say small from the tip of the petals across. It's maybe 2 inches. We had gone to Greece a number of years back and had gone to the Temple of Poseidon, and I was just amazed to see these tiny little narcissus blooming in fall, because I knew there were fall crocus, but I didn't know there were fall narcissus until we went. And then the Temple of Poseidon, which is down on the very southeast corner of the peninsula that Athens is part of. On day 8 and 9, we left Athens, started driving down the Peloponnese Peninsula. I see my Peloponnese got cut off with the E on the separate line. Went from the Corinth Canal down to the Mycenae Peninsula. And if you remember, probably should have said more about it, but down at the bottom of the Peloponnese Peninsula is a small finger, which is called the Mycenae Peninsula, which is where we spent most of our time. We saw a variety of things. I'm not going to mention crocus or colchicums since Cyndy's going to be talking about those, but saw this heather that was in flower. It's a fall blooming heather. Saw this colchicum, or saw this allium, which is interesting in that it puts up a flower spike in the spring, but then goes dormant because of lack of moisture. And then in the fall, it puts out the flowers from the stalk that it had put up in the springtime. Clematis serosa, which is sometimes called fall clematis. It used to be sold by Nancy Goodwin up at, when she had Montrose Nursery. I think Elizabeth Lawrence talks about Clematis serosa. I don't know if it's in commercial trade or not, but one of the stops we had along the roadside, there was Clematis serosa blooming. Saw this, this oak acorn, which had the most amazing cap on an acorn I think I've ever seen. It was the acorn itself was fairly typical of an acorn, but the cap that surrounded it was just amazing to look at. On day 10 and 11, we botanized along the west coast of the Mycenae Peninsula. I've got a boatload of photographs that I took. I've shown a crocus and a colchicum, but I know that Cyndy's going to talk about them more. The plant that I don't think Cyndy's going to say anything about is this Prospero autumnale, which, if you're trying to understand the size of this photograph, it's probably the size of the last 2 digits on your little finger. It's maybe 1.5 inches high and 3/4 inch across, but so many little flowers and such microscopic detail. You can find it throughout all of Greece. I think we probably saw it almost every day that we went out botanizing, from the northern end to the southern end of Greece. And because it was such a delicate looking little flower, when you got down and looked at it carefully, I found it to be probably one of the more interesting plants that we saw. The days 10 and 11, I said another fabulous meal. Like I said, every day we had just amazing food on this trip. It was good that we only had 1 large meal each day, because I think we would have all been very uncomfortable if we'd eaten more than 1 large meal. You get down in that area and there's a lot of just very scenic towns. This particular town was largely abandoned. And so you were looking at the buildings. A lot of parts of Greece, there's still a strong memory of World War II and the Nazi occupation of Greece. But a lot of these smaller towns, were abandoned during World War II and have only a fraction of the population they had previously. We also had the opportunity to see olives being harvested. And yes, there's very distinct difference between the olives that are used for olive oil versus that we buy in the grocery store to eat. But and every little town has its own olive gathering and pressing capability. But we stopped at one place where they were harvesting olives, and I think Nancy's going to talk more about that. Had some amazing sunsets. This is looking over the town of Areopoli and the Ionian Sea. Day 12 was our trip back to Athens. I'd shown the pictures of the mountains, limestone and sandstone mountains in the northern part of Greece. These mountains are between the town of Kalamata, from which Kalamata olives get their name, and Sparta, which I think everybody's heard of Sparta sometime in their public school experience, which are just these massive granite mountains. Up toward the top of the ridge line, or up through the valley that we went, we ran across an area that had galanthus, fall blooming galanthus in bloom. Lefteria wanted to try to stop as many places as he could to go show us some plant that we hadn't seen before, and our last botanizing trip was just about sundown. I think by the time it was over, we were wandering around in the dark to get back to the vans we were traveling in, but had a great last sunset at that particular stop. As I said, that was the end of the botanical tour. We also spent 3 additional days as part of a botany tour that included 2 days in Athens, going to the Agora area, which is the ancient marketplace. There's what's referred to as the ancient Agora, which dates back to 5th century BC, and then the Roman Agora, which was adjacent to it, but was from the time of the Romans. Went up to the Parthenon and the Acropolis, went to did those 3 stops one day, and then the next day we went to the National Archaeology Museum. If you get to Greece and you're in Athens, be sure to take time to try to go to the National Archaeology Museum. We also went to a couple of other places, which I'm going to skip over just in the interest of time. Day 15, we went back down to the Peloponnes, and if there was a concern about this trip, it was just we spent a lot of time in a van traveling. We covered a lot of distance. We traveled in 2 large vans, but we became very good friends with each other. Went to Mycenae. This is a picture of the Lion Gate, which is the main entrance to Mycenae. Mycenae dates back to about the 5th or 6th century BC. It's the oldest Bronze Age city the oldest city in Europe where bronze was found and used. It was just an impressive sight. I put in this picture of a Asarum vulgare, which to the Greeks is kind of viewed as a weed almost because it's so abundant everywhere, but it had a little Jack in the Pulpit bloom on it. I thought it was really cute, and then I found out the Greeks view it as a weed, and I was like, well, I guess it depends on where you're at. What's a weed and what's an interesting plant? We also went to the Roman settlement of Asklepios, which was essentially a mental health facility that the Romans had built for their troops. It was basically, in modern terms, you'd say it was a hospital for people suffering from PTSD. I think the Romans realized that all the battles they had caused a lot of stress, and this was the amphitheater at Asklepios. There were a number of other facilities there as well. And the last day, we went up to Delphi. I'd always seen the wood carving of the oracle at Delphi. and didn't realize how large a settlement Delphi was. To the upper right of this photo, there's a diorama map of the town, the community. The oracles would make their pronouncements to towns about whether their future was good or bad and what they should do. And if it came true, a lot of times the town would send them resources to build a temple of one sort or the other. The largest of those was the temple of Apollo that was at Delphi, that you can see from the map layout that it was not just a single guy. It was quite an undertaking. On one of the walls that when we were going through Delphi, saw this campanula, which I think this is normally viewed as a spring blooming campanula, but was in bloom while we were there. And then the last photo and slide is the mosaics at the monastery of the Osius Lucas, which is in English would be simply Saint Luke. It's not the Saint Luke that wrote the epistle that's in the New Testament. It was a hermit who was in the area in the 6th century AD, but just beautiful mosaics, beautiful ornamentation on the inside of the church there. And so with that was a general, like I said, a travel log of where we went and what we saw. So I will turn it back over to Chris. Or do you want to take any? Yeah, go ahead, Chris.
All righty, I think it's Nancy's turn, right? You there, Nancy? I think she may have gone back to Greece.
She needs to unmute and share her screen.
I've asked her to unmute.
How'd that go?
Like I said, I think she went back to Greece.
I see her.
Saw that after sorry. Okay.
Looks like it's your turn, Nancy. You got it?
You hear me now?
Yep, we hear you.
Okie doke. Let me check some buttons I need to check. Okay.
It's coming through.
It's coming through. Good. All good? You can hear me?
And you still have your resolution turned down, right, Nancy?
Yeah, I didn't change that.
Okay, good.
So it should stay. Okay, hi everybody. I'm Nancy Doubrava, and I want to just talk to you about saffron and the production of it. It was really neat. Today we're going to travel to a town that's about 4 hours north of Athens. So we're way up in the top near the Macedonia area. And we're going to go to the fields and look and see how this spice is produced. And also then we're going to briefly go to the cooperative, which is in Kozani. And for a few minutes, we'll take a look quickly at a olive harvest that we ran into along the way. Okay, first the saffron crocus. Well, it was originally cultivated in Greece, okay, and it's been cultivated there somewhere between 300 and 500 years for the production of saffron. Okay, it was in this area. It's been around a lot longer, back in Cleopatra time. The 3 red stigmas are what we're going to talk about here. They call them threads or the filaments, and that's where it'll be harvested. Now, one of the things, this is the world's most expensive spice, as you always hear about, and you'll understand why. The production's really, really labor intensive. And the standards vary all over the world, okay? Just to give you an idea, Iran produces 90% of the saffron you buy. Now, there's India and there's Spain, but this little area of Greece has standardized their practices through a cooperative that they formed, the Cooperative of Saffron. So this is some of the higher quality, production. When we arrived there, it was 70 and kind of cloudy. I just want to show you how close the fields are to the road. This is a Crocus, and all along the roadsides are the fields of what we have. And the growers for this whole area are members of the cooperative of saffron, which regulates the process, how things are harvested and made. Now the harvest starts early in the morning, ideally before the flowers are even open. It's a real busy time. It depends on weather conditions. The rains had started already and the flowers were up. Like David said, they're all holding their breath a month before this when things were dry. But the seasonal rains had started. Now the flowering will only last about 1 to 2 weeks at the most. So this is a busy, busy time. The Greek red saffron, like I said, is one of the ones they're saying is one of the highest quality. And it's a very mild Mediterranean climate, and it's been produced in this region, like I said, over 300 years. Now, depending, the regional harvest will be about 6 to 12 tons each year. So there's fields and fields of this all around. You can see the families are out, and they're on the right side of this screen. You can see they've already collected these. This is a basket, one of the baskets in the field of what they've collected. And here's all the flowers, and you can still see the stigmas are there. All this will be separated by hand, and then they're going to be meticulously dried, weighed, and packaged from this point on. Let's see, it has a very mild, the region, like I said, let me tell you a little bit about growing saffron at this point. It's a very mild climate here, so it's ideal. The pH of the soil, there's a lot of calcium in it, is pH 6 to 8. It's very well drained, that's a key. And what they consider is a deep soil base. Even though it's well drained, it might seem kind of tough down there. The roots can go very deep, about at least 8 inches down, and obviously it's in full sun. Now the growers of this cooperative in this area, they become dedicated to organic production, and that's one of the things for organic production of saffron. So we asked them about what their problems are, and you can see they have a lot of problems. So one of the gardeners there, or the growers, he whipped out of his bag on the left his vole trap. So, and this is Yoda on the right, or Flash they call him, and he's helping if there's any rabbits in the field and all too. But they're an organic production place. Let me show you quickly just an idea. You can get an idea here of what it's like. This is Nicholas, one of the farmers in the area. They had a hard time digging them out.
Come on. Right. Oh, very nice.
Well, you can see here that the corms, they're really deep. Saffron is from a corm, and you can see the corms, you know, below in the picture, but I want you to see, they kept emphasizing how deep in the soil they grow. And this is Liberto over here, Dario, well, left Harry, Dariotis, and our leader again, very proud we got those out. Now, we're going to leave the fields, and we're going back just briefly here to take a look at, there's about 3 miles north of the fields in a town called Kozani, and well, it's more of a city called Kozani. We're going to look at the facilities where they educate, but they also do the drying, weighing, packaging, and shipping of the product. They have about 2,000 members and growers in the area in this cooperative, and they were formed in 1971. Okay, the part that was really the most interesting well, instead of all their packing machines, I just want to show you how they dry the areas where they take the dried saffron and weigh it. So everybody, you know, the standards here, they want no perfume, no hairspray, everybody's clean. You can see on the right side of the screen here, the saffron filaments that have been dried and how they're being weighed now. Okay, briefly, it's hard to not talk about olives. I'm gonna change gears here and talk just a few slides here about the olives. Olives are everywhere there, and there's 120 million trees in Greece. They're in backyards, they're in fields for production, and like David said, there's different types of olives. And the harvest season is really this is the early end of it, the way I understand it. And as the first lesson you learn with olives as you walk around is you don't pick an olive and eat it off the tree. They're really, really bitter. Well, olive trees, they can live to be thousands of years old. One on Crete, this tree is about 4,000 years old. It's estimated to be. You can see how the trees grow. They have these huge trunks as they age, and because they're pruned off the top for the harvest. Just briefly on the harvest. This is a very crude harvest we ran into by accident. And you can see on the left that it's a little blurry slide, but you can see basically a tarp is involved. And on the right, some kind of raking or shaking of the tree is involved. Today, I saw pictures of actually it's very mechanized in the large fields. Well, they'll put a shaker around the trunk. They'll clasp the trunk, shake the tree with this machine, and it'll all be caught and bagged from there. But I'll show you here, let's see if we got him. Here's what we actually came upon. Well, let me give you an idea first. One of the things that caught everybody's eye or their nose, is that there's a smell of olive oil all through the air here. Well, as you can see, this is a small operation. That was a very small operation. And I think you heard Lefterry in the background say, I've never seen it done like that before. So they're in the process of pruning and harvesting on a little smaller scale here. You can see the person at the right of the picture is actually taking the branches and beating them into this collection area there. But nowadays they have very gas-powered machines. Even if they're doing it by hand, it'll be on a gas-powered machine that'll spin. They'll be on a pole with a little spinny rake on the end to help knock them off the trees. So it's basically knock them off, catch them, and pick them up. There's all levels of that. And then they go for processing. So that's the end of my little part. These were from the field there that we just saw. So they get quite a bit. On the ground, the right is the tarp, what it looks like, and the numbers of bags just on the small local level. It's pretty exciting. So Cyndy, you're gonna be next with all the bulbs. Thank you.
Okay, so
It's coming through, Cyndy.
okay. There we go. Awesome.
Good.
So am I up on the screen too or not?
You're very good.
Okay, because I don't see myself, I just see you, which is weird. Chris, why am I seeing your video on the side? Is that normal?
I don't know why you'd be seeing my video. I have my video turned off.
Yeah, I just see your name up in the box where I should be. Is that
Yeah,
what?
because we see you because you're talking.
Okay, awesome. Okay, because normally when I do this, I see myself as I'm talking, so I'm not sure what's going on today. So anyway, this part of the talk, I'm going to be talking about mainly Cyclamen, Crocus, colchicum, and a few other plants and places and people. But before I started, I wanted to talk about a couple anytime you take a great trip, part of that great trip is going to be the people. And these were two super special ones. Eleftherios Dariotis, also known as Liberto Dario on Facebook. He and Janet Davis, my friend from the New Zealand trip, were great friends on Facebook for many, many years, had never met in person. And this was the first night they met at the restaurant in Athens. It was quite a moment. And it was great to be traveling with the two of them. And of course, all three of us had traveled with Panioti in the past. So I felt like Panioti was there in spirit at least. And Janet Davis she's a great follow on Facebook. She's from Toronto and is an excellent photographer and also has a really good blog called The Paint Box Garden. And she writes long form articles about places she's visited, including this Greece trip, if you want more detail on what we did and saw. This book is an oversized coffee table book written by Chris Gardner, who's a Brit married to a Turkish lady, Başak, and they run Vira Natura Tour Company and travel all over the world on botanic tours. And this book has wonderful photographs of a lot of the plants that we saw on the trip. So that's one to look for in English language. I didn't have much luck finding a good field guide for the area. So the first genus I'm going to be talking about are Cyclamen. And although I'm going to be talking about the ones we saw on the trip from Athens to Meteora on the first day, we saw Cyclamen everywhere throughout, from the northern area in Kalampaka all the way down to the tip of the Mycenae Peninsula. And we only saw two species, however. We saw Cyclamen heterofolium and Cyclamen grecum. And one way you can tell the difference between the two is by digging up the tuber, as Lefteri has done here, and examining where the roots are emerging. Flowers and the foliage emerge straight from the tuber in both species, and you can see that here. But the roots on heterofolium will emerge from the top and sides of the tuber. In Cyclamen grecum, they emerge from the bottom. And here we are at our first botanizing stop. The area was covered with Cyclamen grecum, and everybody was able to get quite up close and personal with them. Extremely beautiful foliage as well as pretty flowers. Another way to tell the two species apart is by looking at the markings on the outer petals. In Cyclamen grecum, they're long, thin lines running in parallel, usually 3 or more. Cyclamen heterofolium, there's stubby short lines in a V shape. Don't go too far up the outside of each petal. We saw these heterofolium in the foothills of Mount Kylodromo, which is a bit farther northwest on our way to Kalampaka. Another differentiation is the foliage. Cyclamen grecum foliage has beautiful patterning and variation, just like you see on heterofolium, but it's heart-shaped. Heterofolium foliage is more of an ivy shape with lobes and angles. And this clump kind of illustrates the life cycle of the Cyclamen heterofolium flowers, and it's similar for Cyclamen grecum. After flowering, the seed capsule will be formed. As the seed capsule ripens, the weight of the seed capsule bends and coils the stem down to the ground, where it ripens and is carried off by ants the following summer for distribution. So it was a long drive from Athens, where we started out, all the way up to Kalampaka, where the monasteries were located. It would have been about 6 hours if we'd gone straight through, but obviously took a lot longer with botanizing and lunch stops. So by the time we reached Meteora, this is what it looked like. It was after dark. The sides of the cliff faces are lit up, and the town of Kalampaka is spread out below. As David mentioned, this is a UNESCO World Heritage Site. And even the following morning, it was still very striking to see these rocky formations rising up above the town. Also got to see my first verbascum undulatum in Kalampaka. They were all over Greece too. These these are rosettes for the following summer's blooms, but the foliage is so decorative. It's gray, it's felted, and it's got these gorgeous scalloped edges. Here's a shot from the walk about halfway up. One interesting thing is these walkways that we took to get to the top and visit some of the monasteries were only constructed in the 1920s. And as David mentioned, these areas have been inhabited for quite a lot longer than that. Before, you had to use ropes or long, long ladders to get up here. There's Amelia in front of a beautiful rose garden outside one of the monasteries. The gardening style is very Italianate with lots of hardscape and conifers. And in order to really see the, just gonna move that. In order to really see the structure of the monasteries, you had to drive away from them because they're really settled into the rock there, and they're not meant to be conspicuous. This was a defensive position where these monks were. So a lot of the times we were kind of looking up, and there's most of the group. This is our tour guide here. She was a very nice lady. And again, this is about as far up as a vehicle could get. And from there, it's stairs and ropes. And right up here is one of the monasteries. And of course, there's a cat with this group. And here's one of the vertiginous walkways across. If you're afraid of heights, it wasn't a great place to be. You can see Virginia creeper ripening on the cliff edge there. And again, just the integration of the structure with the stone was very, very impressive. And after touring the monasteries, we were able to do a little bit of botanizing to the south of Kalampaka. It was rainy, and Lefteri wasn't happy because it was raining and we couldn't see things. So it also made the plants not at their best. Here we have first crocus of the trip, Crocus cancellatus, subspecies Motioricus. It was closed this day against the rain. A little bit farther south in Smokovo, we saw one that was open but battered because of the rain. And so I looked up online, what's it gonna look like if we ever find one? Well, gorgeous, of course, but the advice I've also found online, if you wanna grow these at home, under glass in an alpine house. So I gather the blossom is fairly fragile. So to see the rest of the beautiful crocuses, we had to head south towards Athens, cross the Isthmus of Corinth, cross the canal at Corinth, and do our plant hunting in the Peloponnese. And here's the canal at Corinth, which is pretty spectacular looking. We just drove across and found our first white crocus, which is Crocus hadriaticus. You can see in the rain, it's a little battered. And the other white crocus we saw this particular day in the Peloponnese, up more in the north, was Crocus boreae. And Lefteri, it was pouring rain at this point, and Lefteri very kindly found a blossom and dissected it for us so we could really get a closer look at that branched, feathery looking stigma that distinguishes boreae from hadriaticus, which does not have that feature. So to see the best plants, even in the Peloponnese, which is great, you really need to go to the Mycenae Peninsula, which is this middle peninsula, the southern part of the Peloponnese, and that's what we did. And David showed you this allium earlier. It was, to our eyes, it's beautiful. Apparently it's widespread throughout Southern Europe, but it was the striped marking on the petals and that chartreuse center were pretty spectacular. And this to me was the horticulture moment of the trip, this field full of Crocus boreae. I'd never seen anything like it. It was pretty wonderful. And here's a close-up of one of the clumps. You can see very clearly here the feathered stigmas that characterize this particular crocus. Also the white anthers, and some of these, like this one up here, the white anthers are pretty prominent. And there was another crocus also nearby called Crocus niveus, which where you tell the difference, well, there's a number of differences, but they still have that orangey yellow branched stigma, but yellow anthers. And just looking back and forth, this clump of Crocus boreai, you can see the structure of the petals, the flower arrangement is a little laxer, and the white coloration is not quite as pure and crisp looking as in Crocus niveus. It's also, which has a very formal petal arrangement, the 3 and 3. Just to me, it's a more dramatic flower. For some reason, anemone coronaria, which I think are a spring bulb, were blooming in a field nearby, so that was fun to see those. Another crocus we saw all over the Mycenae, growing basically as a roadside weed, was Crocus glimii. Here's a typical location. There's the pavement, and then all these weeds, and then this crocus happily playing amongst them. We had color variation from very light lavender all the way to deeper blues and even bluey purples. It was a very nice roadside weed in the Mycenae. Here's a nice swath of Crocus niveus that we came across. The goblet shape of some of the flowers is just stunning to me. We had lavender variations. A lot of them had extremely bright yellow flower stalks that they were on. And just to go back for a minute, and you could see that the lavender variations and that gorgeous form. To me, Crocus niveus is definitely one to try. And there's one more shot because I love him so. It's just adorable. And to catch one more crocus, which David also showed us a picture of, we have to, let me see if I get we were in the Peloponnese on the Mycenae, and we have to come back across the canal at Corinth and into the area of Greece called Attica, which is where Athens is located. And there in Attica, there was the one example in my memory of that Crocus cartwrightianus. And there it is, and you can see we were all lined up to take a picture of that. And it's interesting because from a distance, to my semi-blind eyes, this little guy here, which is a colchicum, doesn't look all that different from the Crocus cartwrightianus that we saw, the precursor of the saffron crocus that Nancy showed earlier. But there are some fairly easy differentiations. One thing you can do if you're not sure if it's a colchicum or a crocus is to dig up the bulb and eat it. And if you don't get sick, it's probably a crocus. Colchicums are poisonous in all parts. The other differentiation that's pretty easy is you can see on this crocus, the stamens, bright yellow stamens, there's 3 of them. And in colchicums, there are 6. So that's a little bit easier. Also, colchicums don't bloom with foliage. The foliage emerges in the spring, dies back, and then they bloom without foliage, and they have that nickname naked ladies because of that. So now we're going to start looking at colchicums. This first one is a rare endemic found right outside Athens and a few other places. It's Colchicum sphacazianum, named after George Thikas, a Greek botanist. And here's the distribution of it. It's the Peloponnese, these western islands here, and this one spot right near Lefteri's home in Athens. And it's very hard to spot these colchicums. The colchicum season starts in September, and by the beginning of November, it's pretty much winding up. But we were able to spot a few with the help of the birder in our group, Louise, who, with her binoculars, spotted these 12 feet above the trail on Mount Hymettus, just outside Athens. It's pretty easy to see the 6 stamens on some of these. So continuing on the Attic Peninsula from Athens, we were southeast in the suburbs of Athens, head over to the east coast to the seaside resort of Vrona. We struggled with the weather conditions always, but wanted to see all those fabulous plants, so we dealt with it. Here's Colchicum coupanii near Verona, kind of a wooded setting. And here's the beach with the gentleman has his fishing poles set up on a beautiful day. There was an interesting flora on this beach in Verona. This is an annual succulent called Salicornia europaeum, which is widespread in marshlands in Europe. I'd never seen it though. It looked like a sea creature to me with these red tentacles. There's also a really nice Asteraceae combination. Aster tripolius is the pale blue there with Deprichia viscosa, the yellow, all along the beach. And Colchicum parlatoris, which we're going to see a few times in this presentation. There was the sunlight caught that very nicely, and you can see the prominent structure of the flower. There's one more Colchicum we saw. It was on the first day in the Parnassus foothills, Colchicum autumnale, and I only saw a few, and they looked pretty puny. And I think it was just because we were at the end of the Colchicum season. So I imagine there's a lot more Colchicum autumnale normally. That's when a lot of us grow. But to see the best Colchicums, we have to come back from the Attic Peninsula and Athens, cross the Isthmus of Corinth again and the canal, and head all the way south again to the Mycenae Peninsula. And while we were there, it was lovely to be shown the fauna from our comfortable viewpoints from the van. This is actually a little tortoise that we would have run over, but Lefteria jumped out and rescued him, so that was nice. Here's Colchicum sauridis in the Mycenae, and Colchicum parlatoris again. But to see Colchicum parlatoris in the very best location, we need to go even farther south. So here's the Mycenae Peninsula, and we're headed to the very tip, to Cape Tainaron, to hike out to the lighthouse and maybe see some plants growing in limestone crevices. Here in this picture is Elsa Liner, and on the right is Carolyn White, two lovely travel companions, dressed appropriately. It was a hot day. The signage indicated the trail was not going to be too difficult, only a 2 out of 5, but that's a Greek 2 out of 5, and I think some of us found it a little challenging. The terrain was a little uneven, so you had to watch each step, but it was obvious there were tons of plants that really enjoyed these conditions, and because of the timing, it was the beginning of November, a lot of things had gone to seed, but there were plants there eventually, and the viewpoints were amazing. It is military property, so we stayed a careful distance away from the lighthouse. But the lighthouse marks the southernmost point of the Greek mainland. That was neat to see. And there was that Colchicum parlatoris that we've seen a couple of times earlier, happily skipping about in these crevices. And here was one that posed very nicely for me in the limestone crevice, all the way down at Cape Tainaron. So now there's just a couple more things. I think David showed you. Here's heading north, here's Sparta, and just the west is Kalamata, where the olives live. And also the fall blooming snowdrops, Galanthus reginae olgae. I just wanted to mention that they were originally described by a Greek botanist in the 1870s. And the name, the species name, which means Queen Olga, is for the Queen of Greece at the time, who was also the Queen of Russia. And one more just final scene, which to me kind of reflects the mood of the trip. We were up near Mycenae during the botanizing portion of the trip, although we didn't visit the ruins. I guess the group visited them afterwards. And there were that hillside full of fall blooming heather that David showed you, and it was hard to get a good overall shot. It was pretty stunning, and it smelled lovely, and everyone was just in a lovely mood. And I love this picture of Richard Lane overseeing all the botanists and just soaking in the atmosphere and taking the long view of things on this wonderful trip. And before I leave you, I'm going to remind you, if you're wondering about what are we doing, when are our meetings, how do you join, you can visit our website, piedmontnargs.org. Thanks. Stop. So now, I guess if anyone has questions, now they can unmute themselves and ask.
Charlie had a question in the chat. Does olive oil in Greece taste better?
I don't have any memory of tasting it, to be honest.
Okay. And Marianne asked, how much do farmers get for saffron?
That I don't know. It's a good question. The actual farmers, I don't know. I think they're really paid piecemeal type workers. I saw actually as we left the area, the fields, there were some little quote temporary huts made like for the season along the roadside where some families would come to stay for the harvest. I don't know. One thing I wanted to say about the olive oil, my sister got me some that was from there, and it was fantastic. I guess because it's all from the way they do it. You know, what we get in our stores is made from a lot of different sources. When you read the label, it's a conglomerate. And the pure we got that was from whatever she got me from one particular location was fantastic. It was just really nice, much better. I wish I would have bought more. Let's see. Did you guys confrontation?
Oh, native plant conservation. That's an interesting question. And one thing that was interesting is there isn't a lot of ornamental gardening in Greece the way we think about it. I mean, I think because agriculture there is largely for food and crops. And actually, Lefteri mentioned when we were hiking on that mountain near his home outside Athens, he said he remembers hiking on it and looking at plants as a 5-year-old, but it's only in the last several years he's become interested in native Greek plants. He wanted to grow roses. He liked English style gardens and English style plants. And it's only in the last few years that he's started to appreciate the native flora.
Gardens.
Kathy's raised her hand for some reason. I've asked her to ask a question by unmuting herself if that's what she has.
I'll just briefly answer Sandy Harwood's question about timing. We were there. I mean, it was great for crocuses. Colchicums, we were kind of at the end of the season, but I felt like it was a great time for the crocuses and the cyclamen. And Lefteri often said we really needed to come back in April because that's when, of course, the spring blooming flowers, and Crete in April seems to be the thing to do if you really want to see a lot of incredible wildflowers.
Yeah, I would add that on the issue of timing, you know, we were going from northern Greece down to the southern tip, and we hit it kind of at the peak of the saffron crocus in northern Greece. You know, I think most of the folks who go to the Peloponnes, we were there about the right time for, even if we were going to the Peloponnese. It just varies from year to year depending on the rains and other stuff. But, you know, early part of November is generally the time of year that people would go if they're wanting to go to the Peloponnese. And I think when we were in northern Greece, it worked out well as also.
Was there someone who's going to unmute and ask the question, or?
I guess Kathy doesn't have a question, but there are a couple more in the chat. Sandy's Sandy's asked, how long do the saffron plants last? Do they divide or dig them up on a regular basis?
So they rotate. They have a problem in the fields with, can you hear me? Yeah, they have a problem in the fields. The pathogen is Rhizoctonia. So they have a system where every 6 years they kind of rotate fields. They let a field actually just stay in place for 6 years. You know, and they dig up the bulbs, the corms that you saw, you know, they'll use a lot of those for propagation because, of course, the plant's sterile, so they'll divide those up. I think somebody else asked where they put back in the ground. I think he did. I'm pretty sure he dug them back in the ground. They were too nice, you know, to just be tossed or something. They respected their plants quite a bit in that area. How long do the plants last? They only bloom, I said 1 to 2 weeks, but it's really like a week to 10 days. And that's when they have to do the harvest. But the bulbs, like I said, they keep them like, if there's no problems with Rhizoctonia, they'll keep them there, I think about 6 years, and then rotate the fields that are there in that area.
Yeah, my sense was they got pretty congested in the ground, and the division is purely to sustain the propagation.
Yeah. But I do think the farmers are getting more now with the cooperative de saffron that was formed. You know, like I said, in the early 70s, everybody was competing against each other. Before that, little farmers were here and there, and everybody was doing it whatever way they wanted. Some weren't pure. Pretty much I was reading an article that said, if you don't pay for the saffron, if you buy it online now, it's like $15 a little gram. I think you could see this is like a little gram, this container of these filaments. But if you don't pay for it, it's usually mixed with a lot of different things. It can be and harvested different ways for the quality. So I think in this area, it's helped pay the farmers a little bit more and the people actually doing the harvesting, having the cooperative. For a trip to Greece.
There's a question in the chat that might be best addressed by David. Gloria asked that there was, I guess, talk about botanizing trip to Crete, and she's wondering what's coming up next in NARGS.
Well, I've talked to Lefteri actually just in the past week or so. He had suggested April. He's actually in the process of relocating himself and his garden to Crete. He said it'd probably take a year or two, and he said if we came in 2023, it would probably be a good timing. But plus he also wants some time to just kind of get more familiar with, you know, the difference between March and April. I was advocating to go in March because by the time April comes, at least I want to stay at home and enjoy everything that's going on locally. But if we did something, it'd probably be March in 2023 would probably be the earliest.
It looks like Gloria's ready to go. She says, woohoo, sign me up.
Yeah, Lefteri was a fabulous guide, both in terms of his knowledge of botany as well as just being a host, making you feel comfortable and arranging meals and a whole range of things.
Yeah, and then there was dance night too, which was he's very involved in the dances of the various regions, and he belongs to a group that they do traditional Greek dances, and he did a demonstration one night after supper, and it was fascinating. It's incredibly complicated and highly disciplined skill set, and I was a complete failure. I kicked too high or something, but it was pretty amazing to see. And one of the ladies on the trip, Estelle, her grandma was from Kalamata, and she remembers, and she grew up in a family of Greek heritage, and she remembered how to do the handkerchief dance. And I'll never forget seeing Estelle
and Lefteri dancing the handkerchief dance at, 11 o'clock at night after a long day of botanizing. It's just really, really special. Okay, well, thanks everyone for attending. I'm sorry for the, it's glitchy. We're not professionals here except for Chris. And I hope that you got something out of it. And I hope someday we'll all be traveling again with NARGS, which would be awesome. Thank you.